Welcome to Uncovered Biblical History and Traditions, the channel dedicated to lost stories of the biblical past. Discover stories of pre-Christian historical roots, biblical legends, lost church history and forgotten historical characters of faith. It is very helpful if you hit the like, subscribe and share. Help build my channel and let's take a look together into these uncovered forgotten tales. Picture this: 3 million Romans line the streets of the most powerful city on earth. They've come to see a prisoner, a barbarian, from the distant island of Britain, bound in heavy chains. But something unprecedented is happening. Instead of jeering and celebrating, the crowd falls silent. Men who've conquered the known world are trembling. A contemporary historian will later write, "Rome trembled when she saw the Briton, though fast in chains." This is the story of Caractacus, the British king who did something no enemy of Rome had ever done before. He didn't just fight the empire, he made them afraid. And what happened next in that Roman courtroom would shatter every precedent in imperial history. Let's go back to the year 52 AD, to a battlefield in Shropshire, England. This wasn't supposed to be happening. Rome had been trying to crush British resistance for 9 years, 9 long, bloody years that had turned into Rome's nightmare. The British resistance was led by a man the Romans called Caractacus, but to his own people, he was the Pendragon, the supreme war leader. And he was making the impossible possible. While other nations fell to Rome in a matter of months, Caractacus had been defeating Roman legions for nearly a decade. Think about what that meant. These weren't just any soldiers, these were the crack Roman legions, the finest military force the world had ever seen. They'd conquered Gaul, crushed Germanic tribes, and subdued the Mediterranean. But in Britain, they were being systematically outmaneuvered and decimated by a Celtic chieftain who seemed to anticipate their every move. The situation had become so desperate that Rome did something unprecedented. They assembled not 1, not 2, but 4 of the greatest military commanders for a single campaign. Imagine the greatest generals of our time all working together on one mission. That's what Rome felt they needed to defeat this one British king. Leading this extraordinary assembly was Aulus Plautius, the veteran of British campaigns. Fighting alongside him was Vespasian, the future emperor of Rome himself. Then there was Titus, Vespasian's son, who would later destroy Jerusalem and scatter the Jewish people. And finally, Geta, the conqueror of North Africa. But even these military legends weren't enough. As the British forces, led by the brilliant Caractacus, continued to outfight them, Rome made an unprecedented decision. Emperor Claudius himself would travel to Britain. Picture the scene: the emperor of the known world, loading elite legions onto ships, bringing war elephants, actual elephants, to a remote island because one man had made his empire look vulnerable. Claudius landed at Richborough and personally took command of the battle that would finally corner the elusive British king. The final battle at Clun was devastating for the British. It wasn't just a military defeat, it was total annihilation. Caractacus was captured, but worse, his entire family was taken prisoner. His wife, his daughter Gladys, his brother, everyone. The British triads, their historical records, would later describe it as the most complete incarceration known as to families. But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. Caractacus initially escaped the battlefield. His supporters urged him to flee so he could regroup and continue the resistance. For a moment, it seemed like the legendary war leader might live to fight another day. That's when fate stepped in with a betrayal worthy of Shakespeare. Caractacus sought sanctuary with Queen Aricia of the Brigantes, a woman whose family had a history of collaboration with Rome. While the exhausted king slept, trusting in the ancient laws of hospitality, the queen had him seized, loaded with chains, and delivered to the Romans like a piece of valuable cargo. The news of his capture spread through Rome like wildfire, according to the historian Tacitus. But the Roman reaction was unlike anything in their history. The capture of this one British king generated more celebration than the defeat of Carthage, more excitement than the conquest of Macedonia. 3 million people, nearly the entire population of Rome, poured into the streets to see this legendary enemy. Now comes the truly extraordinary part. Roman custom was brutal and predictable. Captive enemy leaders, especially those who had inflicted heavy casualties on Roman forces, were thrown into the horrific Tarpeian dungeons. They were tortured, starved, and eventually strangled. Their bodies were then dragged through the streets and thrown into the river like garbage. But Caractacus became the first captive king in Roman history not subjected to this treatment. No one could explain why. Roman law was supposedly unbreakable, Roman tradition absolutely rigid. Yet something about this British prisoner was different. As Caractacus was paraded through Rome in chains, walking behind the emperor's chariot with his family, observers noted something remarkable. Despite his captivity, he walked with dignity. His bearing was so noble, his presence so commanding, that he continued to inspire awe even in defeat. The day of his trial arrived, and even then, unprecedented things kept happening. Roman law forbade women from entering the Senate, but when Caractacus's daughter Gladys was told she couldn't accompany her father, she simply refused to comply. She walked beside him up those marble steps into the Roman Senate, as brave and as composed as her father. Even more shocking, the great Queen Agrippina sat on her throne as a witness to the proceedings, another violation of Roman legal tradition. The most powerful tribunal in the world was being forced to bend its own rules for this British family. Picture the scene, the Roman Senate, packed to capacity with the most powerful men in the world. In the center stands Caractacus, chained, defeated, surrounded by his enemies, but somehow still commanding the room. Emperor Claudius sits in judgment, expecting the usual pleading for mercy that characterized such proceedings. Instead, Caractacus does something that had never happened before in Roman history. He doesn't beg, he doesn't grovel. Instead, he speaks, in a clear voice, trenchant with the passion of righteous vigor, defending not just his own actions, but the rights of free people everywhere. Here are his exact words, preserved for history by Tacitus. Had my government in Britain been directed solely with a view to the preservation of my hereditary domains, or the aggrandizement of my own family, I might long since have entered this city an ally, not a prisoner, nor would you have disdained for a friend a king descended from illustrious ancestors, and the dictator of many nations. My present condition, stripped of its former majesty, is as adverse to myself as it is a cause of triumph to you. What then? I was lord of men, horses, arms, wealth. What wonder if at your dictation I refused to resign them? Does it follow that because the Romans aspired to universal domination, every nation is to accept the vassalage they would impose? I am now in your power betrayed, not conquered. Had I, like others, yielded without resistance, where would have been the name of Caradoc? Where your glory, oblivion would have buried both in the same tomb. Bid me live. I shall survive forever in history, one example at least of Roman clemency. Think about the courage that speech required. This man was standing before people who could order him torn apart by wild animals for entertainment. Yet he spoke not as a defeated supplicant, but as one free man addressing others, defending the principle that no people should accept domination simply because someone else desires to dominate them. Tacitus himself, Rome's greatest historian, emphasized that never before or after was such a challenging speech heard by a Roman tribunal in the Roman Senate. This was the one solitary case in history of such defiance before Roman authority. What happened next defied every expert's prediction. Emperor Claudius, who should have ordered the standard brutal execution, instead did something that shocked everyone in that packed Senate chamber. He freed them, all of them, Caracticus, his entire family, everyone, immediately set free by order of the Claudian tribunal. The Senate erupted in applause. Queen Agrippina rose from her throne and personally approached Caractacus and his daughter Gladys, shaking hands according to British custom, then embracing him according to Roman tradition. Protocol was being shattered left and right. But this wasn't unconditional freedom. Caractacus would remain in Rome on parole for 7 years, and neither he nor his family could ever bear arms against Rome again. Surprisingly, Caractacus agreed to these terms and never broke his word, even when his cousin Arviragus continued the war back in Britain. During his 7 years in Rome, Caractacus lived as a free man, maintaining a royal household with income from his British estates. His son was even allowed to return to Britain to rule the Welsh Silurians in his father's place. When those 7 years ended and Caractacus returned to Britain, he found the war still raging under his cousin Arviragus. But true to his word, he remained aloof from the conflict, honor-bound by his promise to Rome. This adherence to his oath, despite opportunities to resume his legendary military career, became yet another testament to his extraordinary character. For generations, Caractacus's speech was memorized by every British schoolchild, a stirring defense of freedom that inspired those who heard it. But like many treasures of our heritage, it has been largely forgotten in our modern age. If you would like more information where to research this subject, check out my other videos and pause this image and look into these resources. I hope you enjoyed this forgotten biblical story. Leave a like, comment, share and subscribe. This is very helpful. Join me next time for another lost story of our biblical history. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe for more great content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.